bad for is Indians. Everybody feels bad for Indians. They get dogged openly because everybody thinks they're dead. These motherfuckers are not all dead, all right? With my own eyes, I've seen a gathering of 1,500 Native Americans. They were all gathered in one place. The place is called Walmart in New Mexico. There's Indians everywhere. I'd never seen Indians before. I wasn't even sure if they were Indians. It's fucked up, but I asked one of them. It's not nice, but I seen him in the sports section looking at bows and arrows. I had to say something. Excuse me. I don't mean to be rude. Are you an Indian? And he was cool. Yes. Yes, I'm Indian. Still didn't believe him. I had to test him to be sure. This is fucked up. But I had a gum wrapper in my pocket, so I balled that shit up and I threw it on the floor. And a single tear came out his eye. I said, oh shit. I had so many questions. So what tribe are you from? I am a Navajo. I said, word. I studied you in social studies. You're a hunter-gatherer, correct? He said, I guess so. That's what you wish to call it. I said, why? What do you call it? He said, I am an alcoholic. I said, well, what's your name, dog? He said, please. Dog is my cousin. That was a good guess. My name is Running Coyote. What is your name, friend? And that shit caught me off guard. I mean, I didn't want to say my name was Dave to a motherfucker named Running Coyote. This don't feel good enough. He just put me on the spot. I said, huh? My name, what? Oh, my name's Blackfeet. Then I changed the subject. Forget about me. What's going on with you? I want to meet your chief. Why don't me, you, and your chief and your friends get together tonight? We could have a real live peace pipe smoking ritual. We need to celebrate, nigga. I thought you were dead. And he set it up. It was beautiful. It was just like I dreamed. We was all sitting around. Them Indians was beating the drum. Some other Indians came out the back with a long blanket that was folded in half and put in front of us. Opened that shit up, and on the blanket was a long wooden pipe with feathers. And bags of weed were all over the blanket. And Chief walked over. The big ones are 50. The little ones are 25. And these are 10. Me and those Indians got high as shit. I was baked. I told the chief, he was talking, I cut him off. Time out, chief. Sorry to interrupt. I'm fucking smashed, man. The weed's too strong. I'm itching. This is PCP. The spirits have got me. Chief, the spirits have got me. And the chief threw some water in my face. Calm down, blackface. Splash. I said, hey, it's Blackfeet, motherfucker. Take it easy. Blackfeet, you're welcome to stay amongst me and my tribe for the night until the spirits leave you. And they gave me my own teepee to sleep in, which sounds nice. I personally felt like it was a little fucked up, you know, because they all had houses, man. It's like, why can't I sleep with y'all in the house and watch TV? Nigga, I can't be on this grass all night.
Hey, welcome to Dino Reacts, the channel where we take ignorance to excellence. And today we're gonna get into Thomas Sowell. I'm really enjoying him. He's really helping me expand my mind and just introduce me to new trains of thought. A wise man once told me that once you are introduced to new things, you never go back to factory reset. So I'm taking that and I'm moving on with my life. So today's clip, we're gonna talk about why the Native American tribes can never come together after they were destroyed by the settlers coming into the West. Being a Cherokee freeman myself, I'm always interested in Native American heritage. So, as always, let's get after it. Yeah, let's learn something new.
The various indigenous peoples fought among themselves for access to European trading posts, where beaver furs could be traded for goods from across the Atlantic. Among these goods, perhaps the most fateful were guns and liquor. Those Indians immediately in contact with Europeans fought off other Indians trying to reach them, so that most of the furs traded to Europeans came from Indians who had not themselves trapped the animals, but who had acquired their pelts in trade from other Indians farther away in exchange for European goods supplied by the Indian middlemen.
Listen, we might as well just speak of some history. Yes, as long as the Indians fought amongst themselves, no problems. So how many tribes, especially from us Cherokees, Choctaws, and Seminoles, you know what I'm saying, us natives, Aboriginals, Copper Scone, Native Americans, how many of our tribes were annihilated because we didn't decide that we wanted to agree with the settlers? Even though it ended up making the great country of the USA, but for the sake of history, we should talk about that. How many of my tribes were annihilated and written out the history books because of this infighting? But let's continue. I got a personal stake in this one.
Who made a profit on both exchanges. Thus the Cree Indians on the shores of Hudson's Bay became middlemen in the fur trade, and the Iroquois, who dominated the region between the Alleghenies and the Great Lakes, cut off the Ottawas and the Hurons from Quebec and Montreal. In order to get around the Iroquois, the French ventured farther west. More than trade alone was involved. Because access to Europeans meant access to European firearms, this caused a shift in the military balance of power among Indians. The Cree Indians, for example, acquired more than 10,000 firearms from the Hudson Bay Company between 1670 and 1689, not counting the additional firearms they were getting in trade with the French. Those Indians in direct contact with white settlements could acquire enough firearms to shift the military balance of power against rival tribes and nations, whom they accordingly barred from having the same direct contact. Thus the Ojibwa not only acquired guns, but strove to drive the Sioux and the Fox tribes away from the Great Lakes, where they too might have acquired guns. These guns could of course also be used against the white settlers, and often were, but a limiting factor for the Indians was that they needed the settlers not only to supply firearms, but also to repair them and to supply ammunition. In an outbreak of warfare between Indians and whites in 17th century Massachusetts, for example, the Indians won more battles, but the whites won the war when the Indians' ammunition began to run out. In general, warfare between whites and Indians was less common during the colonial era than warfare among the Indians, fighting with one another for access to European settlements. Indian tribes or nations, determined to break through rival tribes or nations who held them at bay from the European trading posts, launched attacks and invasions to gain the coveted access. The Hurons held annual meetings with other local Indians, warning them not to attempt to make direct contact with the French. Later, the Iroquois decimated the Hurons, forcing their remnants westward while absorbing some of the survivors into the Iroquois Confederation. Meanwhile, the Europeans sought better access to the Indian suppliers of pelts without having to go through middlemen. Many of the explorations of the British and the French were for the purpose of finding water routes taking them further inland to the Indians who were the original trappers, where trades could be made without paying the middleman's profit. Isolated European traders, more noted for their courage than their scruples, often penetrated deeper into Indian territory in search of better trading terms and bigger profits. Here and there, organized settlements of whites in colonial North America were able to raid or invade local Indians' territory, but usually there was no need to risk such trials of arms. Moreover, the European settlers were as anxious for the furs traded by the Indians as the Indians were for European goods. Over time, however, as the beavers began to be hunted to extinction in the eastern regions of North America,
I was literally just thinking that right now. I was like, because they weren't hunting beavers for survival, just hunting them for trade for guns and weapons, how many different species of the plains in the middle Americas and the Midwest were drove to damn near extinction just off of pure profit and infighting. Is that written into history? I wonder, do the current Native American tribes take any type of responsibility for that? This is interesting. Let's go.
The fur trade moved west to find new beaver populations. Those Indians who had abandoned their traditional means of livelihood in favor of trade with the European settlers were left in a particularly difficult position after the loss of both hunting opportunities and of their traditional artisan skills. Where there was no such economic interdependence as...
Think about that. If you were like a frontier mastermind, you probably did that on purpose. You got them to hunt their own food supply into extinction, that when it was no longer available and you moved on to tribes that had more of what you want as far as the furs and the pelts, you left them to starve. So what did they end up doing? I'm curious. Let's go.
In colonial Virginia, where tobacco rather than fur was the great export, military hostilities between whites and Indians developed early on. While the first James River settlers readily traded copper for food, escalating corn prices led to forcible seizures of Indian corn and cornfields by the whites, initiating a series of wars in which hundreds were killed on each side. Unlike furs, which white settlers obtained in trade with the Indians, tobacco was grown by the colonists themselves. Although the original settlers were outnumbered by the Powhatan Indians by well over 100 to 1 in the early 17th century, the rapidly growing white population of Virginia was by 1675 more than 10 times the size of the Indian population. While Europeans ultimately prevailed militarily in both North and South America, this was a much more protracted process in the United States and Canada than in Latin America. Moreover, the nature of the Europeans' hegemony differed as between the Iberians, on the one hand, and the British, French, and Americans on the other. In particular, the colonies of transplanted British and French communities in North America remained a largely insular world of their own, with Europeans living in European communities and Indians living in Indian communities, however much the boundaries between the two might move over the years, and however much interaction there might be in the frontier zones between the two. Seldom was there a situation such as that in Spanish America, where a European overlord class lived directly off the work of the indigenous peoples living in European-controlled territory. The exchange of Indian land for European goods was seldom an individual transaction. That is, individual white settlers did not usually buy land from individual Indians and go live in the midst of Indian communities. Rather, officials of the colonial settler governments purchased large tracts of land from Indian tribes and then subdivided it among individual white purchasers. Indeed, all colonial governments at one time or another banned individual land purchases from individual Indians because of the legal and other complications this could cause. Even after the white population grew larger and more powerful in colonial North America, expansion into Indian territory seldom took the classic form of conquest of one sovereign nation by another. The drive for expansion into Indian lands was often led by freelance adventurers rather than by government military forces. Under frontier conditions, even governments on the scene had only limited control of all the people nominally under their authority. As late as 1792, Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter, "I hope, too, that your admonitions against encroachments on the Indian lands will have a beneficial effect. The U.S. finds an Indian war too serious a thing to risk incurring one merely to gratify a few intruders with settlements, which are to cost the other inhabitants of the U.S. 1,000 times their value in taxes for carrying on the war they produce. I am satisfied it will ever be preferred to send armed force and make war against the intruders as being more just and less expensive." Control on the Indian side was not necessarily any more effective, in part because many North American Indians did not have the kind of governmental structures to control their own people that Europeans did. Chiefs selected to lead hunts or to lead wars had no permanent power to impose their will on the whole society. When Indian braves saw their lands invaded by whites, they could strike back and thereby unleash a war between the races, regardless of what more cautious advice might be given them by their elders. Under these circumstances of uncontrollable groups on both sides, outbreaks of frontier warfare between Europeans and Indians did not always depend on decisions made by leaders on either side. The French had a somewhat similar problem with individual entrepreneurs in the fur trade, who in effect extended the European settlements beyond bounds considered militarily defensible. In general, the expansion of the white settlers into Indian territory in North America was directed primarily toward taking over the land itself, rather than acquiring Indians as subjects of the government or as vassals of white landowners or of European ecclesiastical establishments, as happened in much of Spanish America. One consequence of this difference was that Indian and European races were much less mixed in British North America than in Spanish America, where a substantial part of the entire population was of mixed blood after 3 centuries of rule by the Spaniards. Because the advancing Europeans did not generally acquire sovereignty over the Indians living on the invaded territories, the Indians forced off these lands retreated to new lands, where their sovereignty remained more or less intact. Thus, a century after the United States was formed, there were still Indian nations capable of fighting the U.S. Army and of defeating Custer at the Little Bighorn. Only after the American nation spread from the Atlantic to the Pacific was federal sovereignty imposed on Indians still living in their own enclaves.
Very, very interesting. Well, as you can see, infighting, profit, the ability to own firearms so they can have advantages over their fellow tribes is what led to the destructions of most Native American societies. It wasn't just the complete warfare against the military of the American government against them directly. We do have Custer's last stands and those stories that we heard from the past, but mostly it was infighting. They were killing off themselves. Now, me being of Cherokee descent, I wonder what my culture played in that, because they didn't speak upon nothing of that in this video, but I will dig deeper in it to understand why us darker toned Native Americans are never really spoke about. But it's really interesting to hear that the masterminds of Western society that were pushing their manifest destiny to the Pacific Ocean were definitely using psychological warfare to get these people to trade in their natural resources, trade in their sustenance and foods and opportunities for inter-village prosperity for pelts and guns, thus starving off their nations and then making them turn to their other fellow Indians to go raid and pillage their village for resources. As a military strategy, it was a great plan, but when it really comes down to it, it was just pretty much self-destruction. That was a really good video, very good video to dig into, and I'm going to definitely get more knowledge about that going forward. But as always, as we take our minds from ignorance to excellence, let's just keep up the knowledge and studies. I love giving my opinions and my thoughts on things, and I like taking y'all along with me as I raise my consciousness. So once again, thank you guys for watching my video. I love you. Welcome to another Dino Reacts. If you like my content, like, comment, or subscribe. And as always, chef's kiss.